At 46, life was good. We were set in our careers, comfortable home life, and always planning on our next adventure. It wasn't until life threw us a curveball. On August 3rd, 2023, my wife Debbie was diagnosed with stage 4 cervical cancer, and our simple world came to a halt. Reality never sunk in. We lived in shock most of the month, and before we could understand her new life, she was gone. Welcome to 46 and Widowed. I'm your host, Mr. Paul, where I'll focus each month on what I've learned and continue to learn on my grief journey, in hopes to help myself and help others, and how I rely on life, love, and family to get through each day. So let's begin. Welcome back. I thought I'd just jump right into this month's episode titled The Days After, where I wanted to talk about not just the legal things that happen after the death of a spouse, but also some of the emotional stuff that comes along with those days kind of leading up to the funeral and even after the funeral that are still difficult. So I really never knew all the legal issues that would come after the death of a spouse. I mean, I've heard stories and I've seen other people talk about theirs, but to actually do this was time consuming, several headaches, a lot of stress. And as with anybody that loses a spouse, if there's anything monetary or legal that they have, they are going to want to take care of it, fill out a bunch of paperwork to make sure things are settled with the spouse that passed, and also hope that there are things left over for the family, the spouses, the children, and so forth. So one thing that was very consistent with all of it was that you really couldn't do anything unless you had the death certificate. And as I was advised that by the funeral home to request several copies of the original death certificate, because most people are going to ask for those. Most institutes are going to want to know specifics. You know, they're going to want to have the original. They don't want copies. They don't want notarized. They want the original black and white. And sometimes they'll even want the copies of the marriage certificate, you know, to establish that you are the legal spouse to the one that passed. So the first decision that I remember having to make was, of course, the funeral. You know, I remember waking up that next morning and I had already had an appointment set to go talk to the funeral home. And I woke up and I reached over like I did every morning to just give her a, the good morning kiss, and found the bed empty. Of course, reality sank back in. I think I laid there for a while crying before I got up to get ready. And then, everything just didn't feel real. It still felt like a dream. It felt like this wasn't really happening. And I remember my brain just being so foggy with trying to make sense of everything. So I remember getting up, washing up, getting ready to get my day going. My mom had stayed the night with us, me and my son, and she was going to take care of my son so that I could get some sleep. And I can't say that I got much sleep. I think I finally fell asleep out of just emotional exhaustion and crying. But I remember I woke up, I was washing up, and all of a sudden the smoke alarm went off. And of course, I freak out thinking, what's going on? I ran out to the living room, and of course, my family was there. My mom and my brother were cooking breakfast, and somehow my mom had burned the bacon or started a bacon fire or something and set off all the alarms. And well, the alarms in the house are electrical, so it's not battery operated, so you had to go to the breaker to turn it off. And of course, they didn't know any of that. So I had to go turn off the breaker, and we laughed about it. Kind of broke up that emotional cloud over the house that morning. And, I had told my mom, I wanted to keep my son's routine ongoing. So, of course, my brother had taken my son to daycare, as I had asked. And, and then we sat around, had breakfast, and kind of talked about, some of the things of what were going to be planned and ideas of what to do for these next couple of days. So I had an appointment with the funeral home that afternoon, and I had asked my brother and sister-in-law to join me, and I had asked Debbie's brother and sister to join me as well. And they were there for support, but they were there mostly for my set of ears, because I knew I wasn't getting information. People were telling me things, but I just couldn't grasp it or can keep it. So I wanted them to be my extra ears to hear if I missed something during that appointment. And I laugh about this now because, as I mentioned in the previous episode, Debbie was very organized. She had everything planned out except her funeral. In the past, we had talked about what we had wanted or, what we didn't want at our funerals, but, that was expecting to be like 40 something years from now, recent. So when I think about it now, I was like, okay, so here's my final exam to our marriage. She had everything so planned out. She had told me all these things, and now I had to plan out her perfect funeral. And so I laugh about it now because it's like, here's my big exam. Did I listen to everything she said through our 15 years of what she wanted? And to me, I think I did. I think I honored her wishes. I think she had the funeral that she would have wanted. Of course, there's a couple of things that didn't go as planned, but it doesn't matter. They were little things that, like I said, don't matter at this point. So, as we went to the funeral home, the rector was great. He explained everything to us, kind of went down the list of what we needed to do. I remember giving a legal pad to somebody at the table saying, write everything down, so that we don't forget. And then he asked a lot of questions, and a lot of them were easy questions, like which church we were going to use, which flower shop, if we were going to have an escort, where she was going to be buried. Those were simple questions that were easy to answer. One thing he did talk about was visitations. During the visitation hours, the vigils, there's usually songs that get played. And he would say, so most people pick like 5 or 6 songs and we play them during the videos. And he goes, but sometimes those songs get boring or get tiresome because it's the same 6 songs over and over. So he told me, pick at least 20 songs, 20 plus songs that we can use so that the songs aren't just repeating constantly for the time that we're here. Of course, in my head, I'm thinking 20 songs. How am I going to sum up the life and love of mine and Debbie in 20 songs? We were big music fans. We both like different genres. We both like different types of songs and artists. And I was like, how am I going to come up with 20 songs? But ended up being a lot easier once I actually got to sit down and think about it. The second big decision at that time was also the funeral casket. As the funeral director walked us into the room with the different caskets, it's very overwhelming because here you are now still grieving and trying to make sense of the loss, but now having to find, okay, well, this is going to be what they're going to lay them in to rest. And I remember walking around and him talking about the different types and the different material and fabrics and to me it was just in one ear out the other. I remember thinking in my head, it's like, I'm not supposed to be doing this. This is not what we had planned. And I guess I must have said it out loud because before I knew it, everybody was crying. I was crying. We were all hugging each other. And it was true. This is not where we thought we would be at this point. Not just myself, but the family as well. And of course, where we stopped, once we stopped hugging and crying and could hear Debbie telling us, y'all get it together, stop being like that, you don't need to cry for me. Standing in front of the casket that, of course, I picked for her, in her favorite color, pink. I said, that's the one. So we finished up the paperwork. The director asked about life insurance paperwork, so I had to make those phone calls to the school and everywhere she had worked to get that going. And then our next stop was the church. The church was later that afternoon, so I had time to actually go back home and relax and sit. And I said, well, let me think about the songs. I need to come up with 20 songs to play at the visitations. Now, like I said, once I sat down and started thinking about it, it came out pretty easy that I would start off with the songs that I would play on my travels back and forth to San Antonio. When I was driving back and forth from her being in the hospital and coming home to take care of her son, I had started a playlist called Unthinkable because that's what we were going through. We were unthinkable that this was going on, that she had cancer, that she was in the hospital. And then eventually those songs were the basis for the 20. And then as I added songs such as, our wedding song and songs that we had, personal songs that we would listen to that we related to each other or had sent to each other, I asked, of course, our nieces and nephews, the family, our friends, what songs remind you of her. So they kind of filled out the rest of the songs that we would put on this playlist. And of course, I labeled it Debbie's Last Mix. So one nephew had some trouble with coming up with the song, and this was my nephew from my older brother, because he is a musical theater student, and that's his thing. He is well versed in musicals, and he's great. He has a beautiful voice. But he called me and he said, Theo Paul, I can't think of a song. All I know are musical songs. And I said, that's fine, mijo. Just give me a song that you like. I will make it work. I will fit it in somehow. I'll make it work. So he did. He gave me a song that he loves to sing all the time. And I was able to find an instrumental piece of that song. It was on guitar. It was beautiful. And I said, perfect. There's his song. And it fit perfectly well because Debbie loved going to Santa Fe, and that was the title of the song. Everybody had their pick of songs that day. And of course, the Friends songs, some were not appropriate to play at funeral homes. So, but those were songs that we would joke around when we would go out in the past and stuff like that. So that's a whole nother playlist that didn't quite make the top 20 for her funeral. The only other two songs that didn't make the playlist, and that's because they were more personal, were songs that me and my son would sing on the way to daycare every morning. Both of them, one for him, one for her. And one was, a basic nursery rhyme that I would sing to him, every morning. And then the other one was You Are My Sunshine, and we would sing this every day to daycare. And he'd laugh and play. I mean, he wasn't talking at the time, so he would laugh and make noises while I would sing. And that was from the day we got on till today. We still sing it every morning. Those songs we did sing to her one last time at the end of the funeral, while we were at the funeral home, get the privacy to say our last goodbyes. It was just me and him. All the family had already left, and we stood over the casket, and I sang these two songs to her, and he gave her a kiss, and we said goodbye and walked out of the funeral home to start, the rest of the funeral. And then, of course, after the funeral, that day, we had also started, the rosaries at home. Typical Catholic funeral. We honor the dead for like 9 days of rosaries and stuff like that. So that followed afterwards, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So a couple of days later, of course, the death certificates arrived, and that's when it was time to do some work. As foggy and as not connected as I should have been at those times because of all the grief, I had things to do. So I know I had taken the rest of the month off of work, and pretty much that's what I did during that time, was take care of all this paperwork. So once she passed, I had called her work to let them know that she had passed, and the HR director said, "Oh, fine, okay, just give me the death certificates. I'll start the paperwork." All I had to do then was show up with the death certificate. We filled out the paperwork, sent it off. Got the life insurance stuff taken care of there. Even at my work, they had started the paperwork. I just had to give them the death certificate, and all of that was taken care of. The companies, and I am very grateful for that, because I don't think I would have known where even to start on that part. And then I remember coming to the part, okay, it's like Debbie didn't have a will in place before she died. We weren't prepared for her to pass, so we never wrote up a will. So, and according to Texas, the spouse passes, and everything inherited during the marriage passes on to the spouse, and then it goes down the line from there if those people aren't living. Everything started coming to my name once we realized, okay, she's passed. things that had her name on it now fell to me. And I remember filling out, I don't know how many pages of paperwork, and all of them on top of them said affidavit of heirship, showing proof that I was her legal husband and that now I would take on, responsibilities for her debts, her, her monetary things. And that is also when I needed copies of the marriage certificate, because it had to show that I was married to her during this time that she purchased certain objects or certain things. So of course I had to go looking for that, which of course Debbie was very organized, so I already knew where that was. Another thing that helped was that we were each other's beneficiaries on a lot of forms. So that helped when I would state, okay, she had passed, I turned in the death certificate, things would fall to me as the beneficiary. Some things that took a little more time to move over, and some that caused more headaches than not, was the vehicles in the house. So Debbie, when we got married, we would purchase our own vehicles. They were under our own names. That's just how we were doing things. We kind of kept some things separate. Bank account, she had hers, I had mine, but she was on mine because mine was the main account. I was just the beneficiary on her account. And that's just how we worked it, and it worked. So with the vehicles, she had two vehicles. One was paid off, and another one she had taken out maybe 3 years before she passed. So the first one was paid off. That one I just had to change the title to it. So that was pretty much, again, filling out that affidavit of heirship, turn that in, and then they would redo the titles, put it back under my name, and easy. Now the one that we hadn't finished paying off, that took a lot more time because the title wasn't ours yet. So I had to contact the vehicle financial loan, make sure you fill out all those paperwork, send in those affidavits, those copies of the death certificate, and then come back into town and get that paperwork done. So that took a lot of back and forth and a lot of stress, because every time I went, there was like, oh, well, you forgot this paper or you forgot that paper. And I'm like, just give me all the papers at once. I would have done it, to figure it out. So with the vehicle that we still owed, they gave me the choice. You can turn it back in because it's not under your name. You don't have any responsibility for the loan, or you keep it, just kind of take on the responsibility. And I decided to keep it. It was easier in her vehicle to run to San Antonio, get around easier than to park my truck, downtown San Antonio in the garages when we had to go to San Antonio and stuff like that. So it just made sense to keep her car for traveling. So I filled out all that paperwork. They pretty much moved the loan over to my name. Well, of course, continue making those payments. And of course, then I had to go change the insurance, put my name on it, take her name off, make those changes. And of course, the insurance agent was great. A lot of them understand that this is things that go on, so they try to make it as easy as possible, and I'm grateful for that. Like I said, the bank was another one. Since I was not on her account, I had to go to her bank, let them know this was what was going on, or that she had passed. They looked it up that I was a beneficiary, and they said, well, you want to close the account? And I said, of course. There's no reason to keep it open. And of course, there wasn't any money in the account. She had been out of work for about a year at that time, or like half the year by that time. So there wasn't really any income coming in for her, and whatever income she did have, she was using that to pay medical bills. And she goes, well, it's there, so let me use it. It's part of my disability. It's only right that I use that for treatment. So she would pay all that off. So there wasn't much left in her account when I went in. And I thought I was done. But a couple of weeks ago, I got a statement from her bank account saying, the account's still open, and there's fees that need to be paid. And I'm like, what do you mean? I thought I closed it the other day when I went back. So I still have to go back and take care of that and kind of close out that account, so there's no worry or any more hold up on that one. But the biggest headache, of course, was the house. That probably took 3 weeks or more. Well, not even 3 weeks, because I was already back at work and I was still having to deal with the mortgage. And that was probably my biggest headache and my most stressful thing during this time. So when we got married, Debbie and I gave ourselves like 5 years to kind of financially get ourselves together, and so we could buy a house. So we had rented an apartment, and that's where we said, okay, we're only going to stay here 5 years. That's the plan. And of course, when Debbie plans, Debbie plans. So during that time, we tried to clean up all the bills, pay off what we could, but of course, to me, I still had my student loans, the dreaded student loans, that I still carried. So come our 5th anniversary, it was time to buy the house. My dad had mentioned to us about a broker that he knew that would help us get a good deal, a good mortgage. So we filled out the paperwork and we were able to get a good deal. But at the time, I still had the student loans on me. So of course, that was really hindering the interest rate for the loan, for the mortgage. So we talked to the guy and he goes, if you didn't have the student loans, probably get a better interest rate. And of course, we couldn't pay off those student loans like automatically. We didn't have the money for that. So he suggested, why don't we just put the loan under Debbie's name? Your name will be on the deed and on the other paperwork, but she would be the primary borrower for the loan, and we'll see what it comes up on the interest rate. So that's what we did. We talked about it, of course, and like we do, we talked about everything. And I said, well, what's this? We're still both living. We're both still paying for it. So it's like, let's just do it. It's just paperwork. So that's what we did, and we were able to get a good rate on the house, a good mortgage loan, and we moved in on our 5th anniversary. We signed the papers on our anniversary, but we didn't get to move in until like October 7th, like a week later or so. But of course, when Debbie has a plan, Debbie has a plan. So when she passed, of course, I had to inform the mortgage people that she had passed. So I sent in the death certificates. They sent me pretty much a packet of papers that I had to fill out and things that they needed. And one thing they did need was an affidavit of heirship as well, but this one would have had to come from a lawyer. So spoke to my dad. He knew a lawyer that worked at the bank, or has offices at the bank that he used to work at, and got the paperwork that we needed. Had to pay some fees for that, but it was just to show that we had both purchased the house, or we purchased the house during our marriage. And then we also had to get 2 witnesses to testify, like, yes, they were married, when they got the house. We've known them for years, so we had to get that done as well. But that helped me get the paperwork that I needed to transfer the house. So when I got all that done, that took a good couple of weeks. And it was the same with the vehicles. You forgot this paperwork, I need that paper, I need this one. It went back and forth until they finally sent me, okay, here's the final forms. Here are your options. Pick what's best for you, and we'll go from there. So the 3 options I had to look over. One was to just remain the successor of in interest to the loan, and that only meant that I had every right to the loan and the property as if I was the borrower, and I could continue making payments. It just wouldn't show up on my credit report. So I would just be paying off the loan as is and still stay at the house. The second option was to obtain a whole new mortgage, but that could also, and it even said, and from discussions, that you can get a new mortgage, but now you're going to have to start all over again. We were already 10 years into making payments on the house. If I started again, it would start from payment 1. There was still a chance that the interest and all that would change due to the market. And luckily, when I think about it, the interest rate probably wouldn't have been as bad, because by now, I've already paid off the student loans and, off better financially. And then the third option was to just assume the existing loan, which would be taking on the loan, putting it under my name, but it would be as though I bought the house from Debbie. So I would have to pay closing costs, attorney fees, all the different fees that a mortgage company adds on. just to put my name on it, and that I still would have had to been approved to even do that. So I turned in the paperwork that they needed. I picked the best one option that was for me and my son. And I think I made a good choice because, we were now living off a one income house. Leftover life insurance money that I had, I was going to have to make stretch. So I think I picked the right choice of the three, and I was still able to stay in the house because I didn't want to uproot us. I didn't want to change my son's routine anymore, change my routine. This was our house to live in, so I didn't want any drastic changes. And one thing with grief is you're not supposed to make big changes during the early part. You're not thinking clearly, things aren't, your mind's not as clear, so don't make big changes. So I picked the choice I did, and we're still in the house today. One thing that I would recommend, which I still have to do myself, is to have a will or a living will. Something documented somewhere of what you want for these monetary objects that you're going to leave behind. Because most times, it's either it goes to the spouse, it goes to the children. There's always conflict on who gets what. And, so if there's something written down, everybody gets what I said, it makes it a lot easier, And as I said, I still need to do that myself since it's just me and my son now. Of course, he would get everything that I have, but I do need to put that down in writing to say, hey, should something happen to me, these are my wishes. And being that he's still so young, I've had conversations on should something happen to me and what would happen to him. I've had those conversations, but I've yet to put that in writing, so I do need to do that. So a lot of that was the legal issues. I mean, it's very cut and dry, because they're just things that have to get done, and it takes a while. Luckily, I didn't have too many hiccups. I've heard horror stories and stuff like that where people lose the house, There's the blended families and all these things that can interfere with just the functioning of living at home after the spouse passes. So I feel very blessed that I didn't have as many issues, but I'm sure there'll be things down the road that I may have to struggle with. But until then, I won't focus on it unless it comes up on these podcasts. So I want to shift gears now to the emotional side of the days after. As I said, I woke up that morning, reached out for her. She's not there. Break down and cry. I don't know how many times I had to leave rooms, walk away, take a moment just to cry, just to let out the tears. I didn't want to cry around my son. I didn't want to cry around my parents. I would put on that brave face, going to show this other side of me, but sometimes that didn't work. I just broke down, and somebody was always there to be supportive and just hold me or sit with me while I cried and told 100 stories of the same one or the same memory, and I'm thankful for that. And I think the one thing to remember, especially if you're having to comfort or you're taking care of somebody who is grieving, is that they're very vulnerable. They are not in any mind to make a decision. Don't ask them, what do you want? What do you need? It's more just do it. Just do it for them, whether it's cooking for them, cleaning the house, going to get groceries, just the little things. Don't ask them what they want, what they need, because in their mindset, they're just focusing on the person that's gone. And in that time too, I had to do something because I couldn't just sit there and just go over every memory again and cry. So I got very manic one day, and I remember rearranging the house. We still had Christmas decorations up at the time. I remember taking everything down, the Christmas tree. Because in my head I was like, we're going to have guests over, we're going to do the rosaries, and I still have Christmas up. I have Christmas presents still under the tree. Yard is a mess. We haven't cut the yard. And I'm going through all this list of things that I have to do, and at the same time I'm like, I have laundry, people are going to be over. So I started doing the laundry, And she had clothes, and I just threw everything in the wash. And later on, I was like, what did you just do? Some of the clothes that she had still smelled like her. And after I washed it, I had nothing. Nothing that smelled like her. And I remember kicking myself and getting after myself. Like, what did you do? And I remember looking everywhere. It's like, I know her scent is here somewhere. I have to find her scent. And luckily, in her car, she had left the blanket that she would take to chemo. There was another blanket that she would use with my son at night to put him to sleep. And they still smelled like her. So I got them, put them up in the closet. It's like, nobody touched these. These are like the last things that she has that I have that still smell like her. And you don't realize how important that is until later on, that you still want them around, and that's pretty much the only way you will have them. And I joke around too, because she had a specific perfume that she would use, and it was always the hardest to find, because of course Debbie, when she found something, she liked it, and that was all she was going to use. So I remember holidays, Christmas, birthdays, she wanted perfume, and I would have to hunt down San Antonio to look for this one perfume. And after she passed, and we'd go to San Antonio, and I go get my cologne at the same place that we would buy her perfume. If I would find her perfume, I would spray a sample stick, the little paper with the perfume. That's, of course, and then I'd put it in my wallet. Just like, at least it reminds me of her. Because that Christmas week, I couldn't find her perfume before she passed, so she didn't have any more. So now when I see that perfume, I get a sample of it just so that I have a reminder of her. So that's important too. Don't go washing. If you're helping somebody, don't wash the clothes unless you ask them, because those scents are important. Another thing, like I said, don't ask the person what they want, but don't ask them if they're okay, because they're not. I mean, I know how many times I said, I'm okay, I'm fine, we'll get through this. But inside, it was like, no, I'm falling apart. I am not well. I am not good. Could get back into bed, cover my head, and just stay there forever. But I couldn't, because I still had my son to take care of. I think he had some part in me getting to work on my grief, because he was my responsibility now. I wanted to keep his life as normal as possible and still take care of these things that I had to take care of, and my grief as well. So I'm very thankful for him. When I think of grief and how we talk to people, here goes my counselor hat. Things that we say and the way how we say things that depend on how it's accepted as the person that's grieving. There's times where we can go and give our condolences or say we're sorry for your loss. But sometimes they come across as, what's the word? Just bland, I guess, or just that's what you need to say. You don't feel it, you just say it because that's what's meant to be said. And when you're grieving, you can pick up on that stuff. You can pick up the sympathy words, you can pick up the empathy ones, and ones that always get to me is like, oh, I'm so sorry, my condolences, but what happened? Everybody wants to know what happened. And of course, my sarcastic mind says, well, she died, that's what happened. I don't need to sit here and relive the past 6 months with you, just that she was sick, she died, here we are getting ready for her funeral. If you were given any information prior to that, then you had that privilege. But if not, it really doesn't matter. She was sick and she died. So there are other things that in my mind I've gone through, like, I hope, and I don't think they had told me, but would have probably set me off had they told me during this time, or just things that you shouldn't say to people that are grieving. And one of the best examples that I kind of use and see when I talk to my own clients is the scene from Still Magnolias, where Daryl Hannah, they're at the funeral, they're at the cemetery, I think, and Daryl Hannah tells Sally Field's character that she knows that that her daughter's in a better place, that she's not suffering anymore, and then Sally Field kind of goes off on this rant of stages of grief. And that's a good example as to why you should say certain things to a grieving person, especially a spouse. It's because, yes, things happen, but they shouldn't be happening at that moment, or they weren't expected to happen. So why bring it up in that place? So I picked my top 3 things of what not to say to a grieving person. Now, I may have used this in the past myself, but these would have been things that, had they told me, I probably would have made some remark. And the last one, of course, being the most ultimate, push my red button and I'm going to explode and tell you what I really think. So my top 3. So the first one is, had somebody told me she's in a better place. I would have probably, knowing me, I probably wouldn't have said nothing. But in my head, I would have played out this whole scenario of, how can you say that? No, her place is with me here and my son. Her better place is here. Her better place isn't there. Her better place is here with me and our son. The second would have been, God needed another angel. That one would have been, no, God doesn't need another angel. He has plenty of angels. Why would he need another angel? Why would he take my wife? And why would he take my son's mother away from him? Just because he needs another angel? I doubt that. So please don't use that. And then, of course, the one that would have pushed my red button and probably had me explode and made a scene at the funeral. You're young. You will find somebody else. Plus, your son needs a mother. I think I'd be like, thank you. Nobody asked you for your opinion. I think that's rather rude. And no, my son does not need another mother. He has a mother. And I am not about to go look for somebody just to fill a space for your discomfort. And I know a lot of this is well intended. It's not meant to be rude or ugly. But they just lost their spouse, the love of their life. Why would you want them to find somebody else? And how fair is that to that somebody else that is coming into somebody grieving? Obviously, it's not, the intent wouldn't be purposeful. So why would you want somebody to come in to fill a spot that they'll never have? And I know a lot of this is said because the other person, or the person saying it, is uncomfortable with the situation. There's many times that I've had conversations with people and I know they're a little standoffish. If I bring up my wife in conversation, they don't know how to respond because it makes them uncomfortable. Not that I make them uncomfortable, or I may do, but the situation kind of puts a reality into their own lives that, hey, this can happen at any time. Yeah, I'm 46 at the time when she passed, so you're 46, 50, it could happen to you too. So it gets very uncomfortable with them, and that does come across, and I do see that. I don't point it out, but I can tell when people get uncomfortable, or if I say widow or widower, I use those type of words that they get very uncomfortable and they don't quite know how to respond. This is a perfect example is it was several months after she passed. The friend group was wanting to get together. We hadn't gotten together since the funeral, and it had been a couple of months. We're like, we need to get together. Our friend had called us up from New Braunfels, say, hey, I have tickets to this comedy show. Do you want to go? And I'm like, yes, I need to go. I need to get out of the house. I'll meet you in San Antonio, and we'll go to the show. And we'll go out to eat before. We'll just go have a good time, kind of relax, get together like we used to do. And I remember showing up and, all gung-ho, was like, I'm going to have a good night. It's my first night out since the funeral. My son was being taken care of by, I think it was my in-laws at that night. So I had time to relax and spend time with my friends. And it was the most awkward evening, I think. At least to me it was. Because we went out to eat before the show, and we sat around and we're talking, and I couldn't tell, should I bring Debbie up? Should I not talk about her? Do I make comments? And when we would go out, we would sit and we would talk about the old days. We would talk about memories. We would talk about all these old stories. And she was always a big part of that. So when we sat there at dinner, and I think they didn't know how to do it either, because they didn't want to set me off. I didn't want to set the mood off. So I just kind of shut down. And we went to the evening and we went to the comedy show, had a good time. And I remember a couple of days later, I texted our friend in San Antonio, and I was telling her, it's like, I am so sorry for the other night. I was not acting myself. I was so off. I didn't know how to act. I didn't know if I should bring her up. I didn't know if we should talk about her. I didn't want to cry about it. I didn't want to bring the mood down because we were going out to a comedy show. And she goes, no, you were fine. But in my head, I was like, I ruined the night because I was so subconscious about what I was going to do and say about her. Of course, we've gone out several other times and things are back to normal. We talk about her, we laugh about her, we share her memories, and of course make new memories. But it was just that first time getting back into routine that it was very difficult. How do we function as a group now without her? Because she was pretty much, the base. That's how we all became friends. But like I said, it's been good since then. I can't complain. We go out now occasionally. We have plans later in the year to go out again. Holidays were great. We got to spend time together. It's just awkward, I guess, after the first couple of days, because we don't know how to act anymore. We're missing our other half. Even with our friends, we don't know how to act. But we have to remember those are the people that support us. The family is what supports us. So we get back out and do those things as we did before. Other things that came up after she passed and the months that followed. There are certain things that happened that I'll talk about in other episodes because they kind of fit more of those topics. But I do remember, being at home, family coming over, people stopping by, very caring, very, empathetic. They would bring meals, they would bring supper, they would check in on us. And that was always helpful. So again, for those things, just do the things you want to do. Don't ask. Just simply do them for the person that's grieving. The last part of this episode, I wasn't quite sure I wanted to do or discuss because it kind of goes to not a dark spot, but it goes to a spot that makes me very uncomfortable. And after discussing it with several people, and they're like, yes, you need to talk about it because it is part of your grief. It's part of your anger. And I thought I never show any part of my anger in my grieving, but apparently I have. So I am sorry if anybody has been at the end of that. It's not, I did not intend to be like that. I know I probably said things I shouldn't have said the way I did, but this isn't that part. So the part that I questioned about talking about was the gossip. Now, Debbie was very private. I talked about that the first episode. We were very private about her illness. We were very private about her treatments. We were very private about her passing. And being small town, people will always have stories. The information is not always accurate, but they do tend to exaggerate a lot of what they don't know. So there were several stories that went out, several gossip stories that I heard. So moving forward, I have heard just about every gossip that was out there about her death and how she died and how she got sick. So I do know those things. I don't know who said them, but in general, I have heard them and I know. I wasn't very happy at the time. They still get to me. But there is one in particular that I do hope I never find out who said this gossip. I'm not looking for them. I'm not, I want them to know that I know that I am not very happy with what they said. And it pertained to the day that Debbie passed. I'm not going to tell you what the gossip was, just that it pertained to Debbie's passing and my son. And the day I heard that, I would say I was probably red hot, because one, they had no idea. The whole story was just wrong. And then to pull in my son into that story was just wrong. God forgive them for gossiping, for what they did. But I did hear it, and I do know it. And again, that's all I want them to know. Please do not gossip. There is no point in that. And it makes matters worse because that gossip is what sticks around after these people pass. That's not the memory of them that needs to stay, of all these stories made up. I remember me and Debbie would talk. We hated to go to funerals. I mean, we went because we paid our respects to our families, but we hated going because we knew the people that were there just to gossip. People that the family didn't even know, that they were just there to go look to see. And let's look at them. They didn't even look like that in real life, and look what they were wearing, and look what the family was doing. They just go and they gossip about the funerals and the people that passed. It's very sad that that's what they have to do. But for whatever reason, that is their behavior, and that's what they will have to answer to God for. Please don't do that. And luckily I didn't hear it at the time of the funeral when I was more vulnerable or my emotions were running high, because I'm not sure how I would have handled it. But again, just know that I know. And I guess that's the end of this episode. I know it wasn't very exciting, or I talked about legal issues and stuff like that, but I hope the second part helped with how do you take care of those that are grieving. Just be there for them. Sit with them. Cry with them. You don't have to say a word. You just be there for them. Be there with them. And if you want to do something for them, then just do it. Don't ask. Don't wait around for them to ask you. Just do it out of the kindness of your heart, and they'll be grateful. I am grateful for everybody that stepped in, that sent food, that helped out during those first couple of weeks. My mom stayed I think a month with me just to kind of get my feet back on the ground, and her and my mother-in-law taking care of my son and trying to take care of everything else. So I'm very thankful for them and very grateful to have the family and the friends that I have. So that's the end of this month's episode. Next month will be a little bit more exciting, because when we grieve, like I said, our mind is all over the place. And one thing that I think I spent, I would say probably half the year after she passed, was asking the question why. Now, logically, analytically, because I'm a counselor, I had to go look for the answer. Why did she die? Why did she pass from this cancer? What could we have done? What couldn't be done? I wanted to know, but that was just my brain talking. My heart, on the other hand, wanted to know why and couldn't find a reason. So what does the heart do? It tries to come up with the reason why. And through it, going through all the memories of our marriage, of our dating, of our time we were engaged, I was able to look back at coincidences and synchronicities that told me, was it fate? Was this our life? Was it timed? Was it short? Did we overlook it? Did we not pay attention? Even at the funeral, as I said we were married 15 years, but we lived a lifetime. Even something I said played into that. So, and that's what I want to cover next month. Talk about the logical part, stuff that I found, which will be very short because that's very to the point. There's no way around talking about that. The coincidences and those synchronicities that I found that I can connect, and things that people said to us, the experiences we had, told me, yes, it was limited. We didn't have a lot of time, but we just weren't paying attention. So that will be next month's episode. I'll talk about those things and how I connected the heart part to the why. How odd that all these little things that happen in our lives do make sense now that she's gone. So we'll see you next month. Thank you for listening to 46 of Widow, Life, Love, and Family. I'm your host, Mr. Paul. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and I'm still trying to get it on Apple Podcasts. So bear with me there. So we'll see you next month. God bless.